The fundamental assumptions underlying our entire understanding of the solar system have just been permanently overturned, and yet almost no one alive right now has any idea it is happening. While the world's attention remains safely drifted toward the ordinary business of daily life, something extraordinary and deeply unsettling is unfolding in the deep black of interplanetary space. It is a phenomenon that the most powerful observational instruments humanity has ever built are tracking with growing alarm, and the very institutions responsible for monitoring it have chosen, quite deliberately, to keep it completely hidden from the public eye. For months, mainstream astronomers assured anyone who asked that the incoming celestial anomaly, designated 3I Atlas, was nothing more than an astronomical novelty. We were told it was just a spectacular interstellar visitor that would skim harmlessly past the orbital path of Mars before disappearing forever into the freezing dark of the galactic fringe. The trajectory projections were clean, the public messaging was entirely calm, and the overall narrative was comforting. But the universe does not execute highly organized, continuously accelerating trajectories without a fundamental structural driver behind them. The data now accumulating within the subterranean processing centers of global space agencies tells a story that is categorically different from the reassuring fable the public has been offered. According to the raw tracking matrix, the James Webb Space Telescope has transmitted a continuous imagery stream that completely dismantles the accepted model of what this object is and where it is going. The orbital numbers have changed dramatically, and the approach vector has tightened with a precision that passive gravitational drift simply cannot account for. Deep within the classified research networks of the world's space commands, researchers are communicating in hushed tones about a scenario that was previously dismissed as mathematically impossible. The numbers reveal that 3I Atlas is on an active, self-directed collision course with the planet Mars. While the public narrative remains stubbornly anchored to the outdated concept of a runaway space rock responding passively to gravitational forces, the alternative interpretive framework emerging from unredacted telemetry data exposes something far more disturbing than a simple cosmic impact event. The speculative pursuit dataset framework suggests that this object is completely devoid of the chaotic, tumbling physics that govern natural cometary fragments or conventional space debris. Instead, the telemetry indicates that the entity possesses an internal orientation mechanism that behaves far less like an icy kinetic mass and far more like an autonomous deep space vessel executing a precise, targeted insertion vector toward Martian coordinates. As analysts peer deeper into the unprocessed orbital data, the emerging patterns systematically eliminate every explanation rooted in random drift or natural coincidence. The object is actively making micro-adjustments to its structural orientation, refining its guidance parameters with a consistency that implies deliberate control rather than a passive environmental response. Whatever the true nature of this interstellar traveler is, its operational parameters within our interplanetary system are not yet complete, and the window for observation is rapidly closing. The question haunting classified research teams is no longer whether it will arrive, but rather what internal mechanism is driving its methodical target acquisition, and exactly what it intends to do when it gets there. When 3I Atlas was first detected entering our planetary threshold, it presented itself to civilian observers as a rapidly migrating blur wrapped in a luminescent, volatile coma. To casual observation, it looked unremarkable, but its recorded entry velocity bypassed every historical standard for inbound extrasolar bodies, clocking an astonishing 87 kilometers per second relative to the Sun. At that velocity, the object could bridge the entire physical distance between Earth and the Moon in under 80 minutes, a speed that alone was enough to command serious scientific attention, though what followed was enough to shatter our understanding of physics entirely. Raw speed was not what paralyzed the high-altitude observatories monitoring 3I Atlas as it moved deeper into the inner solar system, because speed, however extreme, has natural explanations rooted in gravitational dynamics and interstellar origin vectors. What stopped researchers in their tracks was something fundamentally different: the object's outright rejection of standard thermodynamic behavior in a way that no natural model of cometary physics can accommodate. Natural comets approaching the intense thermal environment of the inner solar system follow a predictable physical script where they either decelerate under gravitational friction or fragment violently as solar radiation destabilizes their frozen cores, causing a structural disintegration that scatters their material across millions of kilometers. This is not theoretical prediction, but an observed reality documented across centuries of cometary astronomy without a single recorded exception, making the physics reliable, consistent, and well understood. 3I Atlas broke that script in a way that left absolutely no room for conventional explanation, because rather than decelerating or fragmenting, the object began accelerating, subtly at first, then continuously with an artificial precision that sits entirely outside the boundary of natural celestial mechanics. The acceleration was not the product of a gravitational slingshot around a massive body, nor was it attributable to outgassing pressure from sublimating surface ice, but it was smooth, sustained, and directional in a way that implied controlled thrust rather than a passive environmental response. For the researchers tracking it in real time, the behavioral signature was deeply unsettling, and even more alarming was what happened to the object's approach vector as 3I Atlas moved inward, and its trajectory began narrowing along an artificially stabilized plane. Microscopic course corrections became mathematically evident within the tracking software, showing tiny but precisely executed adjustments that kept the object aligned with a specific set of coordinates rather than drifting along the arc that pure gravitational dynamics would naturally produce. The surrounding envelope of hyperionized gas and particulate dust doubled in radiant luminosity within days, suggesting energy processes operating within the nucleus far beyond what solar heating could generate. Advanced spectral analysis conducted by orbital observatories added further layers of anomaly to the accumulating record, as unprecedented spikes in high-energy ultraviolet radiation appeared alongside localized carbon dioxide outgassing events occurring at frequencies with no precedent in the documented history of modern astronomy. The object was not behaving like a passive piece of primordial ice caught in a gravitational current, but like an optimized, self-directed kinetic asset moving with purpose toward a specific celestial destination. The development that eliminated all remaining academic deniability came from the deep field sensors of the James Webb Space Telescope, which intercepted something that fundamentally changed the interpretive framework for everything observed before it. The instruments recorded rhythmic, highly ordered energy pulses emanating directly from the structural wake of the anomaly, which were not the chaotic, erratic gas jets produced by uneven solar thermal melting, but deliberate, uniform propulsion bursts occurring at absolutely consistent 17-minute intervals. A mathematically perfect pattern and a systematic signal revealed a controlled orbital maneuver repeated with mechanical regularity across an observation window spanning days. A natural object does not produce propulsion events at fixed mathematical intervals because randomness is the definitive signature of nature, while regularity is the signature of design. The 17-minute pulse cycle represented something that planetary science had no category for, and the orbital consequences of those pulses were being tracked with growing urgency by every major space agency monitoring the object's evolving trajectory. As the combined analytical resources of the world's premier orbital sensors and terrestrial radar arrays continued charting the inbound trajectory, the evolving datasets began assembling a scenario that researchers found increasingly difficult to frame in professionally acceptable language. What had been classified for months as an extreme near-miss event had transformed with mathematical certainty into something that the words near-miss no longer adequately describe. The revised tracking data indicates an updated close approach distance of just 1.95 million kilometers from the Martian surface, which, on the grand scale of cosmic distances, where stars are separated by light years and nearby planetary bodies are tens of millions of kilometers apart, is not a comfortable margin. It is, by any honest astronomical standard, a hair's breadth, representing a gap so narrow that the slightest additional velocity input would close it entirely. And that is precisely where the 17-minute propulsion pulses become not merely anomalous, but actively terrifying in their implications. The addition of only 10 kilometers per second of forward velocity, a tiny fraction of the kinetic energy already being generated by those rhythmic propulsion cycles would be sufficient to convert the current close approach trajectory into a direct structural impact with Mars. The mathematical threshold separating a near miss from a collision is so thin that it falls well within the energy budget of a single sustained outgassing sequence, meaning this is not a scenario with comfortable margins for error, but one where the difference between a flyby and a catastrophic planetary impact is measured in increments of thrust that the object has already demonstrated it can produce on demand. The behavior of the propulsion system compounds this concern significantly, as predictive tracking analysis demonstrates that the systematic pulse events are perfectly coplanar with the orbital alignment of Mars, meaning the thrust being generated is not random in its directional orientation, but geometrically aligned with the target. Astrophysicists are no longer cataloging passive drift through the void, but are instead observing what the tracking matrix characterizes as a prolonged, calculated target acquisition sequence. This is the kind of methodical approach refinement associated with precision navigation rather than natural orbital mechanics, making it appear as though 3I Atlas is exploiting its own vaporized mass as a series of integrated microthrusters, systematically refining its descent profile the way an advanced deep space vessel would match coordinates with a designated entry point. The physical window for a definitive impact scenario continues to narrow with every completed rotation, and current multi-agency models indicate that between late September and the end of that month, any single sustained outgassing sequence could provide the kinetic transition required to lock the object onto an inescapable impact vector. The question this raises goes far beyond the realm of ordinary orbital mechanics, forcing us to ask why this specific planetary target was chosen, and why this precise moment in human technological development was selected, when our instruments are sophisticated enough to detect the anomaly, but our understanding remains insufficient to fully interpret it. The answer to that question sits securely behind the classified firewalls of the world's space commands, but the data itself is already speaking with a clarity that institutional silence cannot permanently suppress. The academic facade surrounding 3I Atlas has fractured under the cumulative weight of the incoming telemetry, and institutional researchers can no longer maintain the posture of comfortable ambiguity in the face of physical data that pushes systematically and consistently in one direction. Peer-reviewed assessments originating from high-level astrophysical research groups have broken with standard protocol to advance a hypothesis that would have been professionally unacceptable to state publicly just months ago, that 3I Atlas is not a natural comet at all, but an engineered, artificial probe of extrasolar origin. The raw physical data provides substantial empirical grounding for this assertion, as high-power radar reflections obtained through the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter and terrestrial deep space antenna arrays have returned intense metallic echoes from the object's interior. These signatures are entirely distinct from the soft, absorbed radar returns characteristic of primitive, icy cometary cores, which are composed primarily of water, ice, dust, and organic material with low radar reflectivity. Internal agency sources describe the structural reflectivity profile of 3I Atlas as something completely outside the cataloged history of human space observation, revealing a signature that implies dense, metallic internal architecture rather than loosely aggregated frozen volatiles. The optical data compounds this finding significantly, as deep field imaging captured by specialized astronomical arrays revealed three distinct, tightly focused, needle-like energy streams in an emerald frequency range converging directly toward the Martian orbital plane. These coherent light structures pulse in perfect synchronization with the object's primary exhaust vents, a coordination that implies integrated system design rather than coincidental physical processes operating independently. The precision of that synchronization, maintained consistently across the entire observation window, represents another data point that natural cometary physics has no framework to explain. The speculative telemetry framework builds a coherent operational picture from these converging lines of evidence, showing that 3I Atlas appears to be deliberately targeting the specific gravitational environment of Mars to execute either a calculated impact or a precision deployment of assets directly into the Martian environment. The nature of those assets, whether automated infrastructure, exotic biological vectors, or something entirely outside current human conceptual frameworks, remains unknown. But the operational signature of what is being observed is consistent with a deployment sequence rather than a passive collision. The physical consequences of a direct kinetic interception are almost impossible to overstate in terms of scale, given that the object operates with an estimated mass of 10 billion tons and an inbound velocity of 57 kilometers per second relative to Mars. The resulting impact would instantaneously liberate over 2 million megatons of kinetic energy, which is thousands of times more destructive than the combined nuclear arsenal of human civilization. The resulting impact crater would span 60 kilometers in width and penetrate 5 kilometers into the Martian crust, ensuring that superheated, displaced material ejected into interplanetary orbit would eventually reach Earth's upper atmosphere. But the physical destruction of surface and subsurface structure represents only the most visible layer of consequence, as the true disruption could occur deep within the planet itself. For decades, astrobiologists have theorized that hypersaline subsurface aquifers beneath Mars preserve ancient, dormant microbial ecosystems sealed from the surface environment for billions of years. The thermal shock wave of a 3I Atlas impact would not merely vaporize surface layers, but would fracture the deepest structures of the Martian lithosphere, violently exposing biological reservoirs that human exploration has never reached and cannot currently access. The speculative pursuit dataset framework introduces a dimension to the 3I Atlas scenario that moves beyond orbital mechanics and impact physics into territory that forces a fundamental reassessment of what humanity understands about the history of our solar system. If the framework's interpretive model is accurate, the object's trajectory is not merely aimed at Mars as a planetary body, but is aimed at a specific geographic coordinate within the Martian surface with a precision that implies prior knowledge of that location. Planetary mapping profiles indicate that the projected impact vector intersects a highly anomalous corridor passing directly above the region known as Elysium Planitia. This young volcanic plain has drawn scientific attention for years due to its unusual surface characteristics, as high-resolution satellite imagery has documented concentric ridges and spiral formations across its surface that replicate complex Fibonacci mathematical sequences with a geometric fidelity that geological processes do not typically produce. At the precise center of these formations lies an enigmatic circular basin spanning 3.5 kilometers in diameter, representing a structure with no identifiable volcanic vents and no signs of conventional meteoritic impact origin. What makes this basin scientifically remarkable is what lines its interior. A massive deposit of crystalline silicates possessing refractive properties that are completely unique to this specific site on Mars. When stimulated by solar radiation at appropriate angles, these crystalline structures emit brief, highly ordered pulses of infrared light at regular, measurable intervals. The emission pattern is not random, but highly organized, and its strict regularity places it completely outside the range of passive geological behavior that planetary science has cataloged across decades of Martian surface observation. The interpretive framework proposed by the tracking matrix is direct in its conclusion, stating that this basin is not a passive geological curiosity left by random cosmic processes. Instead, it appears to be an ancient operational beacon, a long-range rendezvous coordinate installed at a time so distant in planetary history that human civilization did not yet exist to observe its construction. The hypothesis follows that 3I Atlas is not approaching Mars accidentally, or even strategically in a general sense, but is returning to a specific marked location, executing the final leg of a journey whose outbound departure may have occurred millions of years before the first human ancestors stood upright on the African savanna. If the countdown completes and the object strikes this exact geographic beacon, the question that haunts the classified research networks is not merely what the physical impact will produce on the Martian surface. The deeper question is what ancient, buried architecture might be activated or exposed beneath the Martian regolith by the kinetic energy of that arrival, and what infrastructure, dormant across geological timescales, might the impact sequence be designed to awaken rather than destroy? The molecular evidence intercepted from the vaporized trail of 3I Atlas adds a biological dimension that makes the entire scenario far more complex. The final spectral scans performed by the James Webb Space Telescope before data classification revealed that the molecular wake of the object contains complex synthetic polymer chains and highly structured nucleic acid strands that bear a disturbing resemblance to human RNA. This is not the signature of passive interstellar debris accumulated through random chemical processes, but a structured molecular payload that the speculative framework characterizes as a sophisticated living linguistic code drifting through the vacuum, engineered to interact with active biological environments upon arrival. The final phase of the 3I Atlas approach has been met with a response from global space agencies that is itself as telling as any instrumental reading, as an ironclad blanket of administrative silence has descended across the standard public telemetry channels. Data streams from the Perseverance rover and the Maven orbiter have been abruptly severed or subjected to heavy redaction protocols that strip the most anomalous readings before public release. The infrastructure of managed information flow is fully operational, and it is operating in one direction toward containment rather than transparency. Internal whistleblower communications originating from within the tracking networks confirm that an emergency directive designated as Impact Protocol has been quietly deployed across participating agencies. Terrestrial deep space arrays have begun transmitting highly encrypted, high-energy binary sequences toward the Martian orbital plane, though these transmissions serve no physical deflection purpose, as no signal sent from Earth can alter the momentum of a 10 billion-ton object traveling at 57 kilometers per second. The speculative pursuit framework proposes that these signals are instead intended to prime dormant automated assets already stationed on Mars, representing infrastructure placed there in advance of this moment by parties whose identity and timeline of activity remain strictly classified. The picture that emerges from the convergence of all available data, the propulsion pulses, the metallic radar returns, the emerald energy beams, the crystalline beacon at Elysium Planitia, the synthetic molecular payload, and the encrypted transmissions, is not the picture of a random cosmic event unfolding through blind physical chance. It is the picture of a system completing a cycle, a sequence of steps, each building on the last, executing toward a conclusion that was determined long before any living human being had the instruments to observe it. The spectral data introduces one final layer of interpretive complexity that cannot be easily dismissed as 3I Atlas enters its terminal orbital transit, because the relative positions of Mars, Earth, and the Sun are converging into a precise linear alignment, a celestial geometry that mirrors configurations built into the foundations of ancient megalithic structures distributed across multiple continents. If this account of what the data actually shows changes how you see the sky above you tonight, share this video with someone who is still looking up and seeing nothing unusual. Leave your perspective in the comments below and subscribe to the channel right now, because the most important questions humanity has ever faced are not going to announce themselves through official channels, but will arrive exactly like this, quietly, precisely, and right on time.